Although this conference has an overall aim to support people with disabilities, we've seen that a great deal of what will be covered today applies to healthcare in general. After all, 11,200 Americans turn 65 years old every day, and many disabling conditions start as we age. So just a warning. Artificial intelligence is inherently contradictory. We no longer consider a prosthesis an artificial limb, so exactly how artificial is artificial intelligence? And for that matter, how intelligent is this technology? As a tool, AI certainly has potential to improve the daily lives of persons with disabilities, actually, probably for all of us, in a large number of ways. But AI can also perpetuate and even exacerbate existing biases and inequities. So yeah, AI is highly technical, but those among us who are non-techies, and that's definitely me, need to learn all we can about AI's basic principles and concerns about its influence and impacts. We need very diverse groups of people to guide this technology so that it can offer positive outcomes. Now, a little housekeeping reminder for this conference. Presenters are new to Second Life, so please be patient with them. Hold your thoughts and questions until the presenters are done presenting, because they're going to need to concentrate, and thank you for that. And now I hope Roxy has come to introduce our first session and our honored speaker. If not, we have a substitute. Yeah, now if I can only get off the podium. There we go.
Thank you, Jettel. Can you all hear me okay?
Thank you, Simon.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Virtual Abilities 2024 IDRAC Conference. I'm representing Roxy Logan, who could not be here today, to introduce our first speaker. So I'll give you Roxy's introduction. Hello, I'm Roxy Logan. I have multiple sclerosis. I'm a Fine Arts BA Honors student for Hereford College of Arts under the University of St. David's Trinity of Wales in the UK. Today I'm introducing Denis R. Newman-Griffis from the University of Sheffield. His talk today is titled Artificial Intelligence and the Disability Data Justice Representing Human Function and Disability in AI Systems. So thank you for coming, Dr. Newman-Griffis, and please, I will move away from here and let you come forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Hopefully I can also sort out getting up to the podium. Yes, there we go. Great. So yes, wonderful to see all of you. What I'd like to talk with you about today is thinking about the role of AI in helping to shape disability justice and rooting that, and the way we get to that, in ideas of more just disability data. Go on to the next slide here. About this through three lenses, so three sort of stages of my presentation, speaking to different parts of data, AI, and disability. And I'll start with the most immediate topic, which is AI and data technologies. So why would we want to use AI in the first place? You always want to start with this question. AI technologies have a lot of potential to help us enrich our understanding of human functioning and disability through more holistic and more person-centered data. When we look at disability in healthcare, we can see a variety of different barriers that lead to us losing important information about people and lived experience in the data that we use. So information about physical and social contexts that we live and act in is difficult to measure and is therefore rarely captured. Self-perception, priorities, personal experiences, these are not emphasized in the process of healthcare, so they aren't recorded even when they are shared. And a lot of important information that is recorded gets locked away in written notes and therefore isn't really used much in care and certainly isn't used in data analysis. So these and other barriers that we can identify leave us with what we've termed information inequities, incomplete pictures of people's experience that contribute to inequitable health outcomes. But with good design, which I'll talk about later, AI technologies can help to close these gaps. So we can see that digital measurement and self-reported data can help to capture more information about contexts and about experiences and more. And natural language processing technologies, things like large language models, but also many other things, can help to analyze important information that we sort of think of as being locked away in written text. So we can see the benefits of this when we look at the richness of information on functioning. And again, I'm emphasizing that this is a functioning lens specifically, not trying to say that this is about disability more broadly. But when we look at the richness of information on functioning that is reported in text. So here's an example description. Patient has injured himself in bicycle accident. He twisted his left ankle and range of motion is severely limited. He's currently modified independent in ambulation with left side use of crutch. He has a job interview next week and his goal is to walk independently for that. We can see here that this note describes many different aspects of human functioning, including body structures involved, an activity being performed, a social act of a job interview, and an assistive device being used. Now, we've developed some natural language processing pipelines that can help to analyze this information in practice by first identifying where in text information on functional activity is described, so extracting things like patient is independent in showering and shaving, and then identifying the kind of activity being described, here linking to standardized activity codes in the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health, or ICF if you don't like a really, really long name. Included a couple of paper references about the NLP research behind this. So just to give you a sense of how we got to these technologies, I think it's important when we're talking about AI to sort of demystify it a little bit and talk about the process of how you get there. We were focused on functioning information, so we worked with rehabilitation experts throughout our research. And we started by working with those experts to identify where in a set of reference documents that we had for research, these were medical documents, where functioning was being described and what kind of functioning. We then used machine learning to train 2 separate NLP models to effectively mimic what the rehabilitation experts marked. So first extracting the text, finding the where is this described, and then linking it to the ICF for the what is this saying, what is this talking about. And we then evaluated the systems by using a separate set of also expert annotated documents, things that were not observed during the training process, and comparing how well the NLP systems did on identifying what the experts told us that we should get. And this is a good start, but as I said, this has been limited to medical data. And we can think about building on these ideas to bring together multiple sources of information. And we know that to get a more holistic picture of a person's situation, we really need to bring together self-reported information, medical information, and more. This way of thinking about combining and comparing different approaches is an essential way of approaching the design of data and AI systems. So AI can help with enriching data and understanding. And we also know that without reflexive practice, without critical perspectives, those AI technologies can and will propagate ableism. Fixing this and ensuring that it doesn't happen is not just a matter of plugging in a magical wand for equity, as much as we'd like that to be the case. Getting at the roots of ableism in AI and knowing how we can take action against it requires taking more of a systems view, where we're thinking about and acting in the interconnected contexts and decisions that affect AI in practice. We often think, and certainly this is the case in computer science and AI research, we often think about AI in very instrumental ways. For example, you give ChatGPT an input prompt, it gives you an output text and response. You have this linear understanding. Those processes, though, so you're always working within the context of a process that we're trying to perform. I think we may have lost the captions on this particular one. So that process of going from an input to an output is part of a larger process that we're trying to perform. And those processes that we're working with are themselves part of a wider context. So we're trying to accomplish certain goals, we're working with particular people and organizations, we're operating in regulatory and cultural environments, and so on. So when we're working with AI, and when we're building or evaluating it, we are always working in this more complex network of contextual factors. So we can take this view then to start tracing back the histories of the data and the AI that we use, and to understand what decisions were made, how we got from idea to data in a process of datafication, from data to technology via AI system design, and from technology then to action, where we want to evaluate and understand the impact of what we're doing. So we'll look back at the natural language processing work I was talking about earlier. The broader context of this was as part of a research collaboration between two organizations in the U.S. federal government, the National Institutes of Health Clinical Center and the Social Security Administration. The goal of this was to develop data-driven ways to improve disability benefits determination processes, using the NLP technologies that we built to help find information from medical records about functional status. These are the data that SSA was using, so this is what we had to operate in. With that in mind, let's look at this datafication step first. Whenever we have data, whether it's your web browsing data, geolocation, messages, whatever it is, those data are coming from somewhere, and they are the product of a series of decisions. Each of these decisions is reductive. So what we really have, we can think of as a data funnel. We start with our whole infinitely complex person or situation in the world. We first choose what it is that we're interested in saying about them and how we conceptualize it. What do I want to talk about? Then we identify, okay, with that in mind, what can we actually observe about that thing? For example, I can't say much about your mental state. It's not observable to me. Then, of the things we can observe, what do we actually choose to measure, and how? And finally, how do we actually record those measurements for others to use? This is the point where we have data. So at each of these stages, we're losing some of what we could know to get to the data that we do have. So in the context of our NLP example, what's important, what we start with, is Social Security's definition of disability. We are operating in their regulatory and policy context. So here, what's important is the whole person activity and medical history. Now we can't observe everything about that, but we can learn about personal experiences and we can learn about medical measurements. Now in practice, what we'd like to learn about the contexts that those personal experiences are occurring in. But information about context isn't really measured, so we lose that. And we really only get some tests of functioning and pretty good information about medical diagnosis. Of course, not everything in these is always recorded, so we often lose functioning information. It may be observed, it may be measured, but it's not always billable. So in the US, it will often just kind of disappear. And we get some functioning information, and we really only get the medical diagnoses reliably. So these are the data that we have to work with. We've lost many things on our way down to this very diagnosis-focused data. And it's important to note here that these choices that are being made are not necessarily choices that we have working in this space. So often these are choices made by others, in this case choices made by Social Security and by medical professionals, which we need to be conscious of and work within. So this process and analyzing it in this way lets us see the different decisions that are made and why the data that we have are not neutral, but that they represent specific points of view. And this is always true of data. So we can always choose to use less data than is recorded, but we can't choose to use more. We're always strictly limited by these choices in datafication. So seeing these decisions as an exercise in power helps us to understand why we want to imagine alternative data and alternative worlds, and to understand why data are not, the way they're often presented, neutral, authoritative, or even necessarily true. So our key questions to ask about datafication are, what can these data say? What can these specific data say? What are they able to tell you? And whose perspectives are they speaking with? Whose perspectives do they represent? And who is missing from that? We start to see similar things as well when we look at the design of AI systems. The design of these data analysis systems more broadly, certainly including AI, but also wider systems, is also an artifact of specific decisions that are being made in the design process. For whatever data you're working with, whatever goal you want to achieve, there are many different ways to operationalize that in an implemented technology. Those different choices help then to determine who the technology affects and what impact it has in the world. Like we did with data, we can break down the design of an AI system into a series of decisions, really an interconnected network of decisions. We first need to decide what kinds of information this system will be used to analyze. Are we working with text descriptions, medical records, information about function or disability identity? And then what kinds of contexts do we want to use it in healthcare, in public policy, in community living, etc. These will all have very different implications. With this scope in mind, once we've chosen the scope, we then choose what data we think are relevant for accomplishing that goal, and what purpose we want the AI system to be put to. Will it be used to make a decision? Will it help us review information? Will it generate something? And so on. Only after deciding all that do we get to the point of defining how the technology will actually work and how we build the AI model and the system around it. In our NLP example, we can see that in our operational scope, we're only looking at functional activity, because in this particular case, a different team was looking at medical information. So for us, building our technologies, we only get functioning. We're working with medical and administrative records, and we're looking only at text notes. There are no standardized data, there's no structured data, because it's not available. Social Security is not collecting it. The purpose of the technology, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, is to help Social Security decision makers search information, not to make a decision for them. So with all that in mind, we implemented our technologies as the extraction and classification pipeline that I was showing earlier. Now, if we imagine going through this process with different definitions of disability, looking at a medical definition or the social model or a more political and relational model, in our case we were using the ICF, which is a biopsychosocial model, we see how these different definitions impose different power structures in the AI and produce different opportunities and harms. These different definitions, then, simply different ways of thinking about what it is that we want to analyze, lead to dramatically different AI technologies, which will often work at cross purposes to one another and produce different harms as well as different benefits. And so it's by questioning these assumptions that we make in design, by surfacing these decision points, that we see that we don't have all the information from the beginning, and we can identify what alternative models we might want to consider or to develop. With datafication, we were asking about what it is that the data say. Here we're asking about what our system says. And what will it do in the world? What am I saying about the world by building my system this way? And what would other approaches do differently? The final piece to this, then, is the evaluation. Trying to determine how well is your system working with your data? How well are you doing the thing that you want to do? Now, typically in AI systems, we measure this in terms of performance measures. This is technical performance, accuracy, precision, recall, etc. We throw these numbers around. These tell us about how well the AI is performing the specific thing that it is built to do. Are we extracting the text? Are we classifying it accurately? What they don't tell us about is its impact on the process that we're using it in, within the broader context that motivates the work that we're operating within, or in real-world application. So looking back at our NLP example, what we're looking to find in these documents is actually fairly complex language. Observations like moderate difficulty walking 300 feet in clinic with cane. So this is a single piece of information. The methodology to do this was not clear. And more importantly, it wasn't clear what it would mean to get it right. So looking at our ability to find this text exactly, to get every word, we see that our AI systems are quite noisy and they miss a lot of information. So the numbers here are showing that we're doing a sort of decent job at pulling out what we're looking for. The bold text here is an example of what our system extracted, and the wider piece of text is what it meant to do. So we only extracted able to walk 300 feet without stopping out of this larger description. The numbers are generally saying we're doing okay at this. But when we change our focus and we think about the application in helping people find the right information for them, in this case helping Social Security adjudicators find the right information for them to make the decision, we're not interested in getting all the text, simply being able to point people to the right part of the document. And here we see we're actually doing pretty well, where we're able to rank order documents in a way that agrees quite strongly with the amount of functional status information we know that they contain. So here the numbers on this slide, we're getting about an 83 Spearman's row. That means that we have a strong correlation with the ordering that we should have gotten based on the amount of information in the documents. Even this, though, doesn't tell us much about the impact of the system in context. How is it affecting this process of evidence review? Is it making things more efficient to save resources, to reduce the backlog? Is it making things more effective to reduce harms? Is it making them more equitable to better justice? So this is where we need to keep asking our questions that are really focused on the wider systems that these technologies are operating within. And it's this systems view, looking at the interconnected decisions and considerations that affect AI systems in practice, that we need to be using to guide our work in design and in evaluation of AI and data technologies. So by looking at the past and the present in data and technology, we're able to chart some of the paths that we'd like to take forward into the future. What we want to be building towards is a more informed vision of what we might call disability data justice, where we're combining the ideas of data justice, advocating for fairness in visibility, representation, and treatment into data systems, with a wider sense of disability data, this being data collected and used about people with disabilities. So we aim for a more just approach to disability data that is rooted in the intersectionality of disabled experience, and that is disability-led in its design, its implementation, and its evaluation. Here, working with colleagues in disability data and in disability justice, when we map our paths forward in achieving this idea of disability data justice, it cuts across all of these contexts and questions that I've been talking about, drawing on co-design methods in research and more identity-led, disability-centered data on disability, combining with the organizational culture and the leadership to drive change in where we're collecting data, how we're developing systems, how we're using them throughout that ecosystem, and envisioning more person-centered and more multidimensional records that better represent disability. And here this is, we've talked about this vision using the idea of social imaginaries. There was a preprint of a book chapter that will be coming out next year that's at this URL in the chat. Most of all, we see that these futures of disability data and the futures of disability and AI are not fixed. They are not static futures. And we can, through better representation and more informed design, shape disability data and AI together. I'll go ahead and wrap up there. Thank you very much.
This is Jen. I want to remind the audience to click on the giver box that's down by the podium. Dr. Newman-Griffis has a handout in there for us. And I have a question. What barriers do you expect in getting medical professionals to use AI in ways that are appropriate and efficient, the ways like you're trying to create?
It's a very good question, and it's always where we should really start when we're thinking about this kind of change. So, I mean, the biggest barrier whenever advocating for change in practice is that it takes time and it takes effort and it takes different ways of thinking to change that practice. And so there's always going to be resistance to doing that. So one of the sort of key barriers is first being able to articulate, why is this going to change the things that you want to do? Medical professionals, it depends on who you're talking to. Many medical professionals will be very vocal in support of equity and justice. Many of them you talk to them about it and they're like, whatever, that doesn't apply to me, we don't have that problems. You get a whole range of responses, but pretty much all of them are overloaded and trying to do things in the way that they are already doing them. And so we need to be, the barriers there are lack of time, lack of cultural impetus and organizational impetus to make those changes. And there are a lot of technical barriers, and I think this is where the kind of data and AI work. There are a lot of technical barriers to getting the information that matters, to disabled people, and putting it in front of medical professionals to make it available to inform their practice. So it's a long answer to your question, and it's only a few of the barriers that we have to deal with.
Question from Mook. Mook says, I can see how the sheer digital reach of AI regarding written information can be used to improve holistic service, but that same immense reach also generates a bigger danger to privacy. The nature of that unprecedented reach means that it will be one fell swoop in the event of a privacy breakdown. How can this be balanced? Also, is there a worry that such an AI-generated info profile of the patient can displace a more nuanced conversation? I know people whose personal explanations have been overridden by a medical service because the system has something different on file. In the case of AI, will this authority to override be even greater due to its perceived intelligence?
It's a really important question to ask, and thank you for that. There is definitely an enormous risk of that. So I was just at a health informatics conference earlier this week, the American Medical Informatics Association, and there was, as there always is, a lot of conversation about AI and changing practice, and most of it was about large language models. One of the interesting things that's happening right now in terms of this, the second piece that you talked about, the kind of override because the system has something different on file, is increasing use of ambient AI to do things like transcribing a medical encounter, and that we're finding that actually, for many providers, is making it easier to have a more nuanced conversation with the person who's in front of them, because they're not having to work on taking the notes. So that's one piece of positive light. And there are enormous questions of privacy and surveillance in this. So, thinking about getting more kind of multidimensional data that's more representative of what is going on with a person, what's going on with you? What does your life look like outside of the clinical setting, which is most of where we live? we could think about like environmental sensors, we can think about wearable devices, we can think about all these ways to do this pervasive datafication of everything that's going on around us, which is great for getting a big data picture, and also carries with it enormous invasions of privacy and enormous risks of then seizure and abuse of those data for reasons that are not why we wanted to collect them. So for population characterization, for categorization without consent, and so on. So I think how we respond to that is policy advocacy, certainly, but really thinking about making sure that we're building in co-design methods, and that as we are designing these multidimensional data systems, as we're designing AI technologies, that we are designing with and not designing for. Saying that this work has to be, as I said earlier, that this work has to be disability led by the experiences of disabled people, led by disabled researchers, whether in academia or non-academic settings, to really kind of shift the agency and autonomy of how the data systems are designed, but how data are collected and used within those systems, away from being centered in technical producers to being centered in community producers. And some of that requires thinking about different models of data collection and storage and governance. This cannot just be we stick all of the data in medical records, because medical records are owned by medical systems. And that ownership means that they are in a space of colonial practice, and that they are in a space of taking over and serving the interests of those systems, which are not the interests of individual people. So I think a lot of it is about community practice and co-design as we are building these things in the first place, and engaging in constant collaborative critique of those systems.
Gentle asks, what is a good way to get people with disabilities involved in all this research?
So there are some good models for this, a lot of which have been developed in, for example, in kind of disability studies spheres, in human-computer interaction spheres as well. So one of my colleagues who co-authored the book chapter that I mentioned at the end is Dr. Rupa Valdez of the University of Virginia, and Rupa's worked a lot on community-based participatory research in health informatics design and system evaluation. So I think, participatory research methods and models are really important for this. This is speaking from the researcher side. There's things that we need to be doing more of. I think one of the challenges for researchers is you can kind of talk to people, and I feel this too, and say, we need to do participatory research, and it's like, well, that feels really hard and I don't know how to get started. Things like advisory boards, community advisory boards, scientific advisory boards, we have these really good structures for getting community input on research projects that can provide these kinds of opportunities for ongoing conversation. So if we set up, for example, I'm waiting to hear about a grant now, and if we get it, then we'll be setting up a community advisory board from the beginning, so to look at AI in social care. We're going to be setting up a community advisory board from the beginning that will run for the entire length of the project. And we will be working with carers, will be working with disability advocates, with disabled advocates, and to work together on the design of the project, on the methodology, on interpreting the research, and so on. So those are really good models from a researcher side. From a non-researcher, from a sort of non-academic side, I'm less informed on this, since I'm in an academic environment. But I think looking for those kinds of opportunities of where are there advisory boards and advocating through organizations like Virtual Ability, like other disabled people's organizations, using those organizational structures that are recognized, that have voice, that have power, to advocate for, you're doing things that are related to this, we need to be involved, and here's how we can be involved. I think is a good way to try to make some traction on that happen.
Gentle is wondering, she says, surely I can't be the only person here with questions for Dr. Newman-Griffis. And she asks a personal question. You don't need to answer if you don't want to, but you don't sound British. How did you get to the University of Sheffield?
I'm very happy to answer that. No, I'm American. So I've lived in the UK for a few years now. I got to the University of Sheffield because my partner and I just really liked the UK. From traveling there a lot, we sort of fell in love and felt very much at home there, and so looked for, being a couple of academics, looked for academic jobs that could provide an excuse to make it happen. I'm very grateful that we did, not least because we're now living in a place that feels very at home and we're very happy in, but also because through the initial role that I took, that I was able to get at University of Sheffield, I've been working for the last couple of years in a faculty of social sciences, and so combining it gave me an opportunity to combine my background in technical research, in AI development and in health informatics spheres, with more of the social sciences and humanities research methods, to be able to better critique and understand the impact of these systems. So that is, let's say, not a benefit that we were looking for when we moved to the UK, but a real benefit that has come from the work.
Wisdom Seeker says, we have a faculty member from Sheffield in Second Life, Sheila Yoshikawa.
Oh, brilliant.
Gentle asks, you're able to get the US and the UK research communities to work together?
Kind of. So, I mean, international collaboration is always a challenge. It's both more challenging and simpler than one might expect. So I'm able to get people in the US and the UK to work together by showing up and not shutting up. So I show up at US conferences. I talk to my colleagues in the US. I show up at UK conferences. I talk to my colleagues in the UK. I work with colleagues in Australia as well, and starting to make connections in mainland Europe. And it really is about, the thing with working across research communities is you're not really working with a community, you're working with individuals. So you get to know individual people who are just in these different contexts, and they become your contacts and you become their contact. And so it's by having those individual conversations and saying, we share interests, we're looking at similar kinds of questions, let's try to put something together. That then gives you an avenue to speak to shared concerns and shared research that can go to different communities and different contexts across international borders.
says, we have a Greek researcher in the audience today. Maybe you can connect with her. Collaboration is an important part of these professional conferences.
Absolutely, that would be great. And my contact information also is up on the screen, and certainly very happy to follow with people by email as well.
Gentle says, she feels like she's monopolizing. Are there any other questions? Carla says, my main worry is still hallucinations.
Yeah, I can respond to that briefly. Carla, I'm guessing you're talking here about hallucinations in large language models. That is a big worry. Yeah, thank you. It is a big worry, and I think so. I was just at a presentation just before joining this about looking at generating flash fiction about disabled children with large language models, which interestingly did not really have a hallucination problem. It did have some other interesting problems in terms of some ableist language that was being used in kind of overly saccharine inspirational narratives and so on that are quite familiar. You know, I think with hallucinations with large language models it's an interdisciplinary problem. You know, there are technical pieces to it. Fundamentally, the issue is that what you're getting with a large language model is not something that is based in fact. It's not something that is based in any sort of symbolic or traceable reasoning. It's a probabilistic system that's going to give you a statistical sample of language. So what comes back from a machine learning system, including a large language model, is always what is likely. It's not what is true. So that's where these sorts of things come from, is it says, well, this kind of looks like plausible language, and there's no system that's built in to fact check it. So there is good work that's going on in tech companies and in academic research about building in more fact-based reasoning as guardrails and as ways to try to control hallucinations. But I think a lot of it, a lot of the response to this really needs to be better understanding of the practices of what these technologies are good for. So I've done a lot of work on developed a competency framework recently, and I'll dig up the URL and stick it into the chat, about thinking about the use of AI in practice and what. Let me just confirm that this is the right. Yeah, this is the right URL. So this is the URL I was thinking of. AI tools, any AI tool that you use, including a large language model, is going to be good for some things and not good for others. So a lot of what we need to be doing as we are shaping this kind of emerging and dynamic world of AI practice is to identify and to communicate what things are these tools good for, what are they useful for, and what are they not useful for. So in medicine, it's about, you know, as you said, the risks of hallucination in medicine are enormous. So in medicine, it's about working with medical professionals to understand what you're going to get out of an LLM is not factual. It's great for summaries. It's great for giving you templates. It's great for, you know, sort of synthesizing information at a high level, but it's not going to give you factual information. And I see there's a comment in the chat. This is great. I'm gonna have to look up this video about asking an AI to stick to facts, and things like that can be helpful. Fundamentally, the technology is based on something that is going to give you a statistical response. So I think the most powerful way to manage this is by teaching people what are these things good for, and building practices that are about using technologies where they're a good fit and not using them in places where they aren't.
Thank you. Lots of comments coming in now. Here's one that's a little bit older from Mook. Mook says, AI seems to generate extreme scenarios, nothing in the middle.
Luke, I'd be curious to if you could add a little bit more about what you're thinking of there.
The informatics domain, AI is a part. The present LLM, we all know, invents 55% of references to scientific articles. That is absurd.
I definitely agree with that. And I have seen some good work on using sort of control systems, either post-producing a response from an LLM or hooked into an LLM to help try to identify, do some validation of, like, is this a legit reference or not? But I think, again, for me, a lot of it comes down to saying, if you want to get a specific piece of information, if you want a specific reference, a specific item, an LLM is not the right thing, because an LLM is a statistical summary. So getting a summary of an area, getting a summary of an idea, great, it's really good for it. Giving you specific reference points to look at, a search engine, it is not, despite the fact that Google and Microsoft's, Bing and others are like baking LLMs into their search engines. That's not really what they're for. And there's a lot of additional kinds of systems that are built around those to try to bash the square peg into the round hole and make it behave like a search engine.
Interesting. Pecos Kid said, an observation, not a question, but I'm not sure people in general are yet applying enough healthy skepticism, such as garbage in, garbage out, to AI, like they do for computers in general.
Thanks. I definitely agree with that. And I think this is that healthy skepticism and that basic understanding, kind of cutting through the hype and doing the demystification, is honestly the biggest impact and one of the most important things that we need to be doing right now in academia and advocacy and civil society. I'm doing some work right now in the UK context, trying to get some work going around the future of AI skills. And some of that is really, really thinking about how do you cut through all of the hype and all the marketing and all the crap that's saying, AI is going to do all this stuff for us, and get to, here's what it is, here's what it isn't. Any of the value of AI, any of the input and output from AI is all about the data that it's built on. And so understanding, when we talk about AI literacy is in many ways data literacy first and foremost. So yes, I very much agree with that comment, and I think it's something that we are pushing on in academia and in civil society, and it's something that we need to be pushing on more, especially through voices of government and voices of power structures like that.
Great discussion happening here. Lysina Wisdom Seeker says, just a comment, I have more confidence in the good AI can provide, because people like you are involved in developing its use in these ways.
Well, thank you. That is lovely to hear, and I think that's a lot of the impetus behind trying to have more of these conversations and kind of keep these kinds of discussions going in the face of a lot of the hype and the sort of marketing and things. You know, I've talked with been talking with people recently about these narratives of AI is moving too quickly to control, you know, regulation is never going to be able to keep up, it's too complex, you can't understand it, etc., etc. We're very much surrounded by this discourse of complexity and unreachability. And there are people who are pushing those narratives. There are people who are pushing that discourse, and they tend to be people who have a profit incentive in doing so. And so I think it's always useful to keep in mind that yes, there is genuine, and it's really important that there is genuine confusion, there is genuine fear and lack of understanding and feeling of complexity and feeling of things running away, you know, that is coming from us, that is coming from, you know, everybody who's encountering these technologies. But those narratives are being fed and being pushed and being more platformed by companies and individuals who have profit incentives in keeping AI exclusive and keeping it an area of expertise and keeping it out of regulation. And so I think we need that. It's another place where we really need to be employing that critical view and that critical skepticism, is when we hear these kinds of narratives asking, well, there are actually a lot of places where we can intervene. There's a lot of places where we can use power that we have, use platforms that we have to push back on this. And I think that the more that we can be having these kinds of conversations in academic spaces and non-academic spaces and public spaces, the better that will come out of that. I see in the chat, Mook, you did expand your earlier comment. Thank you. I wanted to just reply to that briefly. So you said that AI is a novelty situation. It's been generating extreme scenario imaginations in people, very helpful and very dangerous. And how high is the probability that AI is actually a middle ground tool? And this very much ties for me with these kinds of runaway narratives. And I think that you are bang on, that AI is a middle ground tool, and that thinking about AI as a tool is the really important thing here. So, you know, there is a lot of this talk about AI transformation and AI kind of overhauling or reimagining all these things that we do, and the AI replacement and so on and so forth. And really, you know, what I see as an educator and as a researcher and an AI professional is that the biggest difference that these tools and techniques and methods can make is as a toolbox for working with information and for understanding, I want to do this thing, this other thing that's not got anything to do with AI. This is what I want to do. It's my job. It's the purpose that I'm trying to accomplish. Where do these tools fit? Do I have a hammer? Do I have a spanner? Do I have, you know, is AI being my laser level? What is the thing that I want to do, and where does AI fit into that picture? And if it does, that focusing on the middle ground tool is how we get more control over these kinds of runaway scenarios and prevent that runaway damage by shaping more agency around the use of AI. And by identifying, you know, this isn't like this magical thing that we can't control. These are tools, and we can choose how to use them, and we can shape how we use them. So I think that you're framing there, and thank you for expanding that. You have hit it right on the nose, that we talk in these extreme scenarios. The actual impact in the realistic long term is that AI is a set of tools that we can use in the ways that are or are not appropriate.
Okay, Dr. Newman-Griffis, I just want to thank you. We are past the time that we'd planned for the session. We've had some really, really great comments. I think, Electra, I think you posted Dr. Newman-Griffis' contact information in the chat so that people can reach out. And of course, if you have any comments or questions, that is the thing to do. Dr. Newman-Griffis, this has just been such an enlightening conversation, and certainly given us plenty to think about today. So I want to thank you for coming and sharing some of your research.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to have been able to contribute to this. Thanks, everyone.